Canada is one of the few countries in the world that does not have a national department of education, but several provincial departments of education, which are responsible for educational governance. My presentation today provides an overview of Canada's educational system. For this topic, we will achieve the following objectives, namely, to discuss the brief historical and cultural overview of the evolution of these systems, describe the structure of Canada's education system, cite the strengths and weaknesses of Canada's systems of education, and analyze the interrelationship between educational equality and societal inequality. Canada is the second largest country in the world, spanning 6 time zones and with coastlines on the Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic Oceans. Most Canadians live in urban areas. The largest population growth has been in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver metropolitan areas. Canada's total population is 33 million, with 36% of the population living in the province of Ontario and another 21% living in the province of Quebec. The least populated areas in Canada are the territories of Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, with populations of 33,000, 43,000, and 31,000 respectively. Canada is a federation consisting of 10 provinces and 3 territories. It is a parliamentary democracy organized into 3 levels of government: federal, provincial, and municipal. Under the Constitution Act of 1867, power is divided between the federal and provincial arenas. Section 93 of the Constitution gives exclusive power to the provinces to make laws about education. The provinces and territories are responsible for all aspects of educational governance and the provision of learning opportunities at the elementary, secondary, and post-secondary levels, including vocational and technical education. Under Section 91 of the Constitution, the federal government has jurisdiction over national defense, Indian affairs, the territories, prisons, external affairs, and the economy. Certain educational responsibilities arise, such as the education of service personnel and children of members of the armed forces, the education and training of prison inmates, and the education of registered Indians. Canada is a colony that was settled by the French and the British in the 1600s. Its original inhabitants, the First Nations peoples and the Inuit, were colonized by French and British settlers who were intent on territorial expansion. In Canada, the term Indigenous peoples or aboriginal peoples refers to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. These are the original inhabitants of the land that is now called Canada. In the 2016 census by Statistics Canada, over 1.6 million people in Canada identified as Indigenous, making up 4.9% of the national population. Though severely threatened and in certain areas extinguished by colonial forces, indigenous culture, language, and social systems have shaped the development of Canada and continue to grow and thrive despite extreme adversity. Before colonization, indigenous peoples had developed systems for transferring knowledge and for self-governance that were adapted to their needs. Tribal education instilled specific techniques for teaching young people skills, knowledge, and wisdom for adulthood. When the settlers arrived in Canada, they attempted to convert the indigenous peoples to Christianity and change their ways of life. An aggressively assimilative strategy was instituted as early as the 1800s to prepare aboriginal children for a European way of life. This strategy became known as Canada's residential school system. One of the major institutions to be transferred to the New World was the Roman Catholic Church. The church came to be responsible for the operation of schools in New France. It set up a school or small network of schools, which became Canada's first normal or formal schools. The first schools in the region of Acadia were established by missionaries. Secondary education began with the Jesuits opening a college in Quebec that offered traditional studies in Greek and Latin literature, philosophy, and theology. An exodus of United Empire loyalists migrated from the American colonies into Canada during and after the American Revolution, the majority of which settled in what is today southern Ontario. Because of this huge influx of settlers, the British created a new constitution for Canada. The Constitutional Act of 1791 divided the former colony into Upper Canada, or now called Southern Ontario, and Lower Canada, or presently known as Southern Quebec. Common schools and grammar schools began to be established in Upper Canada in the late 1700s. Common schools were opened without government assistance by those who desired to teach. The first school to receive government assistance was a grammar school which was opened in Kingston in 1792. The Public Schools Act of 1807 authorized a grammar school in each of the 8 districts, with the schoolmaster's salary being publicly funded. These schools charged tuition and residence fees, and only the wealthy could afford to enroll their children. The Common School Act of 1816 created a system of elementary education. It allowed local property owners to meet, select 3 trustees, and hire a teacher who, if approved by the local district board of education, was eligible for a grant in aid from the state. After the 1837 rebellions in Lower and Upper Canada, a new Act of the Union was enacted in 1841, creating one united colony. The colonies came to be known as Canada East and Canada West. As the first session of the new United Parliament of Canada, the Common School Act of 1841 was passed. The Act created a central administrative authority by establishing the post of the Chief Superintendent of Education to oversee the operation of education in Canada West and Canada East. Subsequently, this post was abolished and an assistant superintendent was appointed for each section. A series of acts were enacted, and by the 1850s, a public school system emerged in Canada, which came to form the contours of the present-day provincial educational system. In the 1850s, legislation for school public funding began to be enacted, and legislation for compulsory school attendance was first passed by the province of Ontario in 1871. Children aged 7 to 12 were required to attend school. Other provinces passed similar legislation in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick in 1877, 1882, and 1905 respectively. British Columbia's legislation of 1901 was strengthened in 1921 to include children 7 to 15. Quebec and Newfoundland enacted compulsory education legislation in 1942. Church-sponsored colleges and universities began to be established in the 1800s. Charters were secured from England to establish these institutions. By the 1850s, provincial universities began to be institutionalized. The University of Toronto was founded as a non-denominational university when King's College was reorganized. Today, Canada has 163 recognized public and private universities and 183 recognized public colleges and institutes, including those granting applied and bachelor's degrees. There are also 68 university-level institutions and 51 college-level ones operating as authorized institutions, at which only selected programs are approved under provincially established quality assurance programs. The institutionalization of education was an inherent component of state formation as the Canadian colonies came to establish a system of representative government and a bureaucratic state administration. The early school promoters wanted to create an education system that served to make future generations better than the existing one through school organization and discipline. Free schools were viewed as institutions for helping to alleviate class friction between the rich and the poor. As twentieth in 1999 notes, education would be made free and all children brought into schools. This would bind the classes together in a common enterprise and their children in a common history of having been schooled together. The entrenchment of denominational and minority English and French language rights is a unique characteristic of the present provincial education system. Between 1841 and 1863, a series of education acts created separate schools and dissentient schools, which allowed Protestant and Catholic parents to establish their schools and to receive public funding. These rights came to be entrenched in the Constitution Act of 1867, which was designed to protect the rights and privileges of religious minorities. The Constitution guarantees minority group rights to denominational schools. However, these rights are accessed in various ways at the provincial level depending on the status of denominational schools before entry into the Confederation and the outcome of legal and political developments since the Confederation. The provinces have the discretionary power to provide funding to schools of all religious denominations. British Columbia and Alberta, for example, fund private schools, whereas in Ontario, private schools are not directly funded. Canada's Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantee the provision of education in Canada's two official languages, French and English. Section 23 of the Charter provides parents who speak the minority official language in their province with specific rights to public schooling for their children. The provinces left it to the courts to determine how they should comply with Section 23. One set of issues relates to when these rights apply. The second set of issues that the courts were asked to rule on relates to the homogeneity of schools and control over minority language education. Under the Official Languages Act of 1988, the federal government encouraged and assist provincial and territorial governments in offering educational programs to language minority communities. The federal government provides financial support to the provinces for minority language education and second language instruction. Through the Protocol for Agreements for Minority Language Education and Second Language Instruction 2009 to 2010 to 2012 to 2013, funding agreements have been agreed upon between the federal government and the Council of Ministers of Education in Canada, amounting to about $235 million. These are my references for the discussion of this part of my topic.